We ready?
No. It still says it's waiting. US Embassy Bern.
I have video.
You have video? Oh, there we go.
Ready? It's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our first virtual town hall that we've actually done from Embassy Bern, and I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. We're going to touch on a little bit to just start off telling you that we really appreciate the American support here in Switzerland and in Liechtenstein. You know, Embassy Bern has been working virtually for about 2 months now, and your patience, your interest, your encouragement and support has been fantastic. And I hope our team has done the same for you. I want to mention that our highest priority and our entire team's highest priority here at the embassy is to ensure the safety and the well-being of U.S. citizens in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. And we feel like we've had a very successful couple of months here in trying to get people back to the States who needed to get back and answering questions. One of the things that is on some people's minds is when is the embassies and what services is the embassy actually offering? So just to let you know, the embassy is open. We are rotating staffed until the government allows us to do a full staffing. But the telework scenario that we're under also puts a little bit of a demand on staff, but we have made sure the phones are manned. When you call with anything you need, you'll get it as an American citizen. And if you have any questions, you're also welcome to contact the embassy at bernacs@state.gov if you need help. We'll call you back if you're not able to get us directly, but very quickly we will. We have people monitoring all of those calls. And we are getting a lot of questions about border crossings, health information, travel information, and it is all there under the section for U.S. citizens on the website, so you can see it there. But if you need any help, please let us know. We are doing all passport services and functions correctly, right, for now, and we hope to see more and more regarding visas and other issues opening up as time goes on. So you're here to hear a little bit about elections and how to vote. And we're very excited about our team at Embassy Bern. The plan was for us to get around and meet with you individually or through groups all over doing town halls across Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Hopefully, as we get into the fall, we'll be able to do a little bit more of that. But in the meantime, we're doing our first teletown hall and eager to answer any questions that anybody has as well. We have an expert from Consular, Penny Fields is with us, and she'll join me right after this to answer questions. But I do want to let you know, as American citizens, our ability to vote and our responsibility to vote is a fundamental part of our freedom and democracy. And we want to enable you to do that as quickly and simply as you can. And trust me, it is very easy to do it from overseas if you haven't done it yet. You can register to vote in the upcoming U.S. elections, and American citizens can vote from anywhere in the world that they are. It is 183 days until November 3rd. The time to act is now. You don't want to get down to the wire. First, ensure you are registered in your voting precinct, and then you request your ballot. And next, the fun part, you vote. And then you mail your completed ballot back to your precinct, and always plan several weeks of mailing time to receive your ballot, and then for your ballot to be sent back to your voting precinct. Even more so now, given the circumstances with the infrequency of flights going across the Atlantic, we really urge you to do this as quickly as possible. We know the process can seem a little complicated at first compared to what you're accustomed to at home, but the embassy team has voting experts here that are ready to assist you navigating the process, and I assure you they are a great group of people and eager to make sure you do this quickly, simply, and are happy with the process. Please don't wait. U.S. citizens cannot vote at the embassy on election day. We often have people who show up thinking that this is a precinct. Folks, it's not a precinct. You can't vote. You have to do it in advance. Remember also that overseas absentee voting is fast, it's easy, and available anywhere in the world. If you have friends who are overseas, they can do this as well through the embassy. Most U.S. citizens can complete the voter registration and ballot request application online in a matter of minutes. And it's faster than getting money from the ATM, putting your kids to bed, faster than getting a haircut these days, and definitely faster than eating a good fondue. So it shouldn't take much for you to get it done. I'll now turn this over to Penny Fields, who is our voting action officer, and she will answer any specific questions you have. I'll stand by as well. So if there are any other questions, I'm happy to come in at that point. Thank you for joining us, and happy voting.
Okay, hello. As the ambassador said, my name is Penny. I'm one of your consular officers here at Embassy Bern, and I'm your voting officer. So we're going to try to answer some of your questions. I want to thank the ambassador for that intro and for giving you guys such a lot of great information. I want to emphasize one important piece of information, and you saw this when you were waiting to log in. This website is your #1 go-to website, fvap.gov. That's the Federal Voting Assistance Program.gov, and all of the information, answers to most, if not all of your questions that we're going to cover today can be found there. I want to thank you guys for RSVPing for the event and for joining us. As the ambassador said, voting is one of our most precious fundamental rights in the United States, and the government has done a lot to try to make that as easy as possible. Every U.S. citizen can vote. It is easy. And some of you have sent in questions with your RSVPs, so I want to address a couple of those. The ambassador mentioned you can register online. As an absentee voter, an overseas voter, one of the most important things that you can do every year is to keep your registration information current. And you do that by going to fvap.gov, Federal Voter Assistance Program, and getting a federal postcard application that you can mail in and update your information. You can register to vote even if you've never lived in the United States, even if you don't currently have a permanent residence in the United States. But the important thing to remember is that voter registration is controlled by the states. So perhaps your parents had a permanent residence in a specific state. You want to go to your state of residence or your parent's state of residence. In some states, it's your spouse's state of residence or your partner's state of residence. On fvap.gov, you can find specific state information, and the states control voting registration, deadlines for getting in your ballots, how to mail in your ballot, where to get your ballot, and they also determine whether you can vote in local and state elections or just in the federal or general elections. For all overseas voters, you can also, if you don't get a ballot from your state in time, use the federal generic write-in ballot, which you can download online and send in, or you can get from us here at the embassy. We have paper copies that you can mail in. So there are many ways to go about finding how to register and getting yourself registered, but that's the #1 thing. As the ambassador mentioned, it's 183 days to Election Day, so you still have time, and this is a great time to do it while you're quarantined at home. It's fast and it's easy, and it can all be done at fvap.gov. Okay, so let me check with my colleagues that I'm here. They're looking at your questions, and I'm going to try to answer some of your specific questions that have come in before or that are coming in now in our chat. Thanks for your questions.
Okay, so for someone born outside the United States, how can they register?
Okay, so if you were born outside the United States and you're a U.S. citizen, you can go to fvap.gov. You need to determine what your state of residence is. So that's maybe the state you were born in, or the state where your parents, as I mentioned, had residence or were domiciled, who lived before at the time you were born or before your birth, and check for that state's requirements. Usually you can register online, and then at fvap.gov. They will, the state-specific information will be able to tell you what kind of elections you can vote in and what the deadlines are. If you really can't figure it out from looking at online, we would encourage you to reach out to your state or local election officials in your state. In many states, that's the Secretary of State that will have websites dedicated to registration and other voting information. Other questions?
Okay. A number of people are concerned that their ballots aren't being counted. Can you speak to that? Or, yeah, they're just concerned because they're saying they're sending in these ballots and and it looks like their ballots aren't received or they're not counted.
Okay, so two things. The question was concerns about how to ensure that your ballot was received and that it's being counted in your state of residence, or where you're sending in your ballot for your local, state, or federal election. Again, every state has online websites where you can check. You can check to see if you've registered. If you're not sure, you can check to see when the ballots are going out. Every state usually sends ballots out via mail or email, or permit them to be downloaded electronically 45 days or so before the elections. And then you can check to see if your ballot was received. And that's all available now online. We also encourage you, when you send in your information or you reach out for information, to make sure you're including your email address so that state or local officials can communicate with you electronically. We've had also a lot of questions about actually mailing in your ballot. Now, again, you're going to hate me at the end, by the end of this presentation, for saying this. It really does depend. It depends on your state. Every state is different. So I live in Washington State. That's my state of residence. As a Washingtonian, I can, as an absentee voter, I can email in my ballot, print it out, fill it out, sign it, and then scan it and email it in. Some states permit you to fax in your ballot. Some states require your ballots to be mailed in. So here in Switzerland, until this unusual situation that we find ourselves in, we would recommend that you use the Swiss Post. And as the ambassador said, planning well ahead, giving lots of time for your ballot to get in, and also your registration information if you're having to mail something in. But you can also send your ballot to us here at the embassy, and we will send it through the diplomatic pouch. The diplomatic pouch is still operating, but it is also going slower than usual because it takes the same kind of access to airline and flights that the Swiss Post takes. If you are going to send us mail, either drop off or mail in your ballot to us, you can go to the embassy's website. There are specific instructions there for how to get your ballot into us. You have to make sure that you've addressed it to your local or state voting officials appropriately, that you have appropriate postage on it, and that's in a sealed envelope, and then it goes in an outer envelope that's addressed to us. So it's a couple-step process, but I encourage you to look at our website, the Embassy Bern website, and get specific instructions there. If you have any questions that we're not answering here today, you can always send us an email at votebern@state.gov, and we're happy to give you as much information as we can.
Next question is, there's still confusion about what prior address to give. If they don't live there, that's confusing to give that as your address.
Right, right. It is confusing. So the question was, there's a lot of confusion about what address you should be using when you want to register to vote and you don't actually have your own permanent address in the United States. This is maybe the single biggest conundrum for we overseas voters, especially for those of us that aren't currently really resident in the U.S. So I think it's important to understand that this is driven by the fact that in the United States, all of our elections are really run by and driven by the law and processes at the state level. And we choose, for example, our representatives in the House of Representatives based on the population of our state of residence. we assign electoral votes in the federal election based on the amount of voters, the votes cast in specific states. So our whole system is really tied to residents in specific states. And there's really not a way around that as far as registration goes. So you want to look for what state you have a tie to with respect to residence. Do you own property in a state in the United States? Did your parents have a residence in the United States? Did you ever live in the United States? And if you did, where did you live? And then you want to reach out to that state, to the local election officials. And again, start at fvap.gov with state-by-state information and see what their rules are and how easy they're making it and what they'll permit as far as registration goes. So I know that's not great guidance if you're just not sure, but you really want to look for what ties you have to a specific state in the United States, because that really needs to be your starting point for registration and for voting.
Okay, so the next question is that for submitting a ballot by diplomatic pouch, do they need to include U.S. postage?
Yes, you have to include postage on your ballot. And make sure that it's sufficient. Make sure you've signed your ballot. Make sure you've done taken all of the steps that your voting district requires, your state requires, and you're going to put that inside an outer envelope, seal that up, and mail that to us. So because that mail will get screened and then put into the diplomatic pouch.
I would also add that if people use the federal postcard application on FBAP, that has already got the postage paid. Okay,
so as my colleagues said, if you use the federal postcard application and you're mailing that in to update your registration address, that's postage paid already.
Okay, and then we've got a question of someone has never lived in the United States. Their parents have, but the parents don't remember their prior address. So what should we encourage them to do?
So they may not remember so the question was, I don't know if you guys can hear the questions being read out there, but let's say your parents lived in the U.S. You don't have a residence in the U.S. Your parents can't remember their specific address. So start with the state itself. Maybe you can't remember exactly what town or what street. Your parents can't remember where they lived or where they grew up. But start with the state. Look on fvap.gov for the state's rules. Get the information for that, the state election official for your state, and then reach out to them and ask that question and get guidance from them, because again, it's going to be their rules and they're going to be able to give you better guidance, because it does vary quite a bit from state to state.
Okay, and then let's see here. I think we've covered all of the questions on the YouTube. We had extra ones that were emailed in.
And so there are a couple of follow-up questions as well. So a couple of people were asking about U.S. postage and how they can get U.S. postage in Switzerland.
Okay, so you can go to the U.S. Postal Service site and register for an account there to get postage that you can print out. I'm not sure.
And probably it's better to use the Swiss system as well if you.
Right. So there are two ways. One is you can get postage through the United States Postal Service's website. You have to sign up for an account. There's a couple steps. Pay, and then you can print. But probably the better and the more efficient way is to use the Swiss postal system, which is still operating. Just planning ahead, I think, is really the important thing at this point.
Well, most ballots, they should be able to submit without postage.
Right. Okay. Yeah. In many states, again, it depends on the state. Again, you don't require postage is not required for every ballot for every state, and it also depends on how you have to send it in. If you're faxing it in, obviously you don't need postage because you're not mailing it. You can email it in. You also might consider reaching out to your local election officials and asking them for an exception, asking them if you can submit electronically, even if they don't specifically say that they permit that, because again, these are unusual circumstances. But your state election officials are really your best bet for posing those questions and trying to get through those really tricky situations that you might find yourself in, so that your vote will be counted.
Another one is that people are, it looks like they're confused. They're trying to create accounts on fvat.gov, but they don't need to create an account to have access to all the information.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys could hear that, what Amy says, but you don't have to create an account on fvat.gov, and that's this website here. Okay, so you just go right on there. The information is publicly available. You can search. There are lots of different links. It's really comprehensive. I get all my voting information from there and from our embassy website if I have specific questions as well. So you don't need an account. You don't need to do anything special or specific. You should be able to find what you need. And again, if you're really having trouble negotiating the site and you have follow-up questions, please email us here at the embassy at votebern@state.gov, and we'll be happy to try to help you out.
Okay, and then someone had a question about if they don't receive their ballot in time, what should they do?
If you haven't received your ballot and you're concerned about the timing, again, you need to reach out to your local elected officials, or if you don't get your ballot in time to vote, for the federal or general elections, you can use your federal write-in ballot that we have available at the embassy and that you can download online. It's a generic ballot that you fill in. You can use that ballot if you haven't gotten a ballot and you're concerned.
Okay, and then someone had a good question. Will there be changes this year due to COVID-19? California is allowing people to fax ballots. So
yeah, I mean, as I think we're seeing states everywhere adapting, and that's going to depend on your local election officials. There may, again, as we said, reach out to your local election official. They may be making exceptions to how they're willing to receive ballots. I know in the news you can see states are definitely discussing various ways in which they can set up elections to make them as safe as possible and as accessible as possible to everyone. So that, again, is going to depend on your state, and your state-specific information is going to be so important in this election. I think I just will underscore what the ambassador said earlier. One thing that's really important now is to start now. If you're not sure you're registered, check now. If you're not registered, get registered now. Give yourself the time to figure out what you need to do so that your vote will get in and it will get counted.
Penny, a derivative from this, if I register as an expat and then move back to the United States before the election, will I have to re-register in my new location?
I think, again, that's going to, okay, so the question was, if you're an absentee voter and you've registered as an absentee voter and you're moving back to the states, do you have to re-register? I think, for one thing, it's going to depend on, are you moving back to the same state in which you registered when you were an absentee voter? If you're going somewhere new and different, you're going to have to change your registration. If you have time, again, that's going to be the federal postcard application that you're going to download and send in, or just reaching out to your local election officials. Again, you can check your registration online, usually for every state, to make sure you're registered, make sure you're registered in the right place, make sure you can do the right thing to get your vote counted.
But be careful about voting here and then going home and voting again, even if it's a different state, because it's illegal.
Right. So the ambassador makes a great point there. Be careful not to vote here as an absentee voter and then go back to the United States and vote again in your new state of residence. So you can only vote once. Double voting is not legal. So you want to just be careful about that.
Okay, and how long should we allow for a ballot to make it to the U.S. from Swiss Post?
I think that's a great question. How long will it take for your ballot to get to the U.S. by Swiss Post?
I'd allow 3 weeks.
The ambassador says that he would allow 3 weeks. I think that's pretty good, and
Just to be sure.
Yeah, you want to definitely give yourself plenty of time, and of course monitor on the Swiss federal websites that we've talked about on our embassy webpage, and that the ambassadors mentioned, like where to get information, kind of see what's going on and look for updates. Right now, as I mentioned, the diplomatic pouch is taking about 2 weeks. So.
And someone registered in the last general election in 2016. Do they have to register again?
So you want to you're supposed to update your registration every year. The question was, if you voted in 2016, and you were registered then, do you need to update your registration? You need to go on the website to where you registered before and check to make sure you're registered. Typically, you should be filling out the federal postcard application and updating your registration information every year. A good rule of thumb going forward is every January, fill that out and send that in just to make sure that you're registered in the right place, you're getting the right ballot back to you, and that you have the up-to-date information. So I would definitely go online in your registration state and check to make sure that you're registered appropriately, and make sure that if you need to update your information that you do that.
Okay.
Okay.
There's another question about when people should expect to receive their ballots. The election is in November, so should they expect to see them in October, September, August?
Right. Well, the question was, when should you expect to see your ballot? That's a great question. Typically, election officials send out ballots about 45 days before an election. That's just a general rule of thumb. You may well see that states are sending them out earlier this year. We don't know yet, but again, you want to be proactive here. You want to check, I think, online at your state and local election websites to see what information is out there. And if you're not getting your ballot, maybe you can download it. You can get it electronically. It varies a lot from state to state. But the rule of thumb is 45 days before the election.
So is it possible to check if your absentee ballot was counted?
Is it possible to check if it was counted? I think it's possible to check if your ballot was received based on your local election. Each state has online resources and websites where you can go not only to check your registration, but to check to see if your ballot has been received.
Yeah. Okay. And then someone says they sent in a signed application or registration and they never heard back from the county election board. Should they send another one? How will they get notified?
If you've sent in your registration materials and you haven't heard anything back, I strongly encourage you to follow up. Like try calling them, emailing them, faxing, whatever their contact information is. Checking online to see if you're registered. You want to be proactive here. I think people could be teleworking with all the different postures going on in different states. It's not really business as usual this year, but there are a lot of online resources where you can check and follow up. I strongly always encourage, if you're not sure that you're registered, find out if you're registered. Follow up with your local election officials.
And if you can't get it through the county, go to the state secretary of state.
And if you're not getting it from a local or county election official, you can go to the Secretary of State's website for your state and find information there. And again, as a last resort, if you haven't gotten your ballot, you can mail in your federal write-in ballot, which you can get online. But registration is really key, and the time to really do that is now.
Okay, and then someone says, I have moved in Switzerland. How do I change my Swiss address in order to receive my absentee ballot?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Someone moved in Switzerland since the last time they registered, so they want to know how to update their registration.
Okay, so you can update your registration online, or you can do it by sending in that. I am looking at my notes because I can never remember the name of this document we have to send in. That's the federal postcard application. That is the #1 way elected officials like to receive your updated information. But you also can go online in many states and update your address because you want to make sure your ballot's going to come to you where you live.
And then another question that's interesting is if someone is registered in the state of Florida and they usually have their family send them their ballot, do they need to deregister and register again as a Swiss resident, or can they continue doing it that way?
So they're registered as someone.
So they lived in Florida and they use family's address.
Okay.
Family sends them their ballot every year, every election. And now they're wondering if they need to change that setup or if they can continue.
That's legal.
Yeah, it's fine.
Well, it depends. I mean, and here's the problem. It's not, I don't think it's illegal. The question will be, are you registered as an absentee voter if you're using a Florida address and your ballot is coming if it's an absentee, yeah, I mean, that's fine, I think, to get your ballot. But again, it depends on the state. The rule, so Florida is the example here. Go on to fat.gov and look at what absentee voter rules are for the state of Florida. I'm not an expert on Florida voting, but generally speaking, you can get your ballot at your family's address and have it. But if you want to get your ballot here, you need to update your address for Switzerland.
Okay, and then another question is about ballots being counted again. There's more concern about, the ballot is only counted if there isn't a clear winner. And yeah, that's what's being said here.
Okay. One more time with that question.
The question is that are absentee ballots counted? Because the impression is that they're only counted if there isn't a clear winner.
Oh, no, absentee ballots are always counted. All ballots are counted.
You can actually go to each state site and see the number of absentee ballots, and it's a special precinct most usually. So
as our ambassador's pointing out, like when you go onto each state election websites and you can see, in part what the vote count is, it will break it out for the number of absentee ballots separately from other ballots, non-absentee ballots. I want to swing back really quickly to the question about the Florida question, where someone asked, you receive your ballot at your family's residence in the United States, in Florida, and then they send it on to you in Switzerland. I think there's a difference, and again, it depends on the state, so I'll stick with that answer. There's a difference between being a state resident and voting absentee because you can't make it to the poll on election day, you're going to be out of the state, and not being a resident in the state and being an absentee overseas voter. Because if you're not a resident in the state, some states will not permit you to actually cast a vote in local elections or state elections. You're always eligible to vote in federal elections, but not always in state elections. So I think that's a pretty important distinction for state election law.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we are doing good with the comments, and we are 32 minutes in.
Okay.
I mean,
there's another one for a person if they're moving states, or it's relevant for a person to change states. So do I have to deregister from one state before registering in another? How do I cancel my registration in my original state before I move it to my next state?
So the question was, if you're moving from one state to another state and you're going to change your registration to a new state, do you need to deregister in your original? That's a great question. I don't really know about a process to deregister. I think that you're fine if you just register in your new state, but that it might be a state-by-state thing. Let us check on that for you. I don't want to give you wrong information on that.
I know a question that often comes up that isn't here right now, but we hear a lot is the tax implications of voting in federal elections. Can you speak to that? Or
tax implications of voting. We do occasionally get questions about the tax implications of registering to vote. There are no federal tax implications. Registering to vote in a federal election does not impact you, your federal taxes. Registering to vote in a state and local elections could have some tax implications for state taxation, but that depends on the state, and you want to really get legal or tax advice about that.
And if they file the federal postcard application for registering, they won't. That does not have state or local tax implications.
Okay, so if you registered with your, why can't I remember this, federal postcard application to update your registration information, that has neither state nor federal tax implications. Okay, how are you doing on questions?
We're good. I mean, there's a lot of good information in the comments, and people are sharing helpful information.
Oh, too. That's great. Yeah. So thanks for sharing all that helpful information in the chat. Yeah, people are sharing information and answering some of the questions right in there. Okay. Oh, a Florida voter here says Palm Beach County Elections sent them their ballot by email. That's great. I got my ballot in Washington State by email.
And the same person believes that is pretty sure that you can still vote in local elections in Florida,
Mhm.
even if you're not a resident. So,
Right.
but as you said, that varies from state to state.
Yeah, so maybe just plug our email address.
Okay, it looks like our questions are winding down, and we want to thank you guys for joining us here and for your interest in voting. And we hope that this has been really helpful. If you have any questions that we haven't answered, please do reach out to us at votebern@state.gov, and we will be happy to definitely get back to you. You can, again, find all the information that you need. Really, I touched my face. I know I'm not supposed to. Sorry about that. FF.gov, here it is, the Federal Voter Assistance Program. There's also a lot of really great information on our embassy website, which is ch.usembassy.gov under U.S. Citizen Services. That's where we work. We're here to do what we can for you guys. So please feel free to go there. There's more specific information on sending your ballot into us if you want to have your ballot go back for the elections through the diplomatic pouch. Again, I think the number one message here is really plan ahead. Things are going slower than they usually go. The Swiss Post is still working. It's still a really great option for sending in your ballot, at least at this point, but you definitely want to give it a few weeks. And we're all still at home, so now's a really great time to get your registration and voting situation sorted out. All right. From all our colleagues here in Consular and the U.S. Embassy, thank you for joining us, and happy voting.